I've always said that we will recognise a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank. Meanwhile, our message to the terrorists of Hamas is unchanged and unequivocal. They must immediately release all of the hostages, sign up to a ceasefire, disarm, and accept that they will play no part in the government of Gaza.
How can you possibly say that Hamas has to disassemble themselves? For someone to say that, you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. Hamas isn't just there because they want to. Hamas is there because they have undying level of support from the Palestinian people. You can't just tell them to just remove whatever power they have. It makes no sense. Hamas can't be there whilst you're trying to negotiate. But the problem is there is undying level of support from the Palestinian people for Hamas. There's also a reason why there is no election in the West Bank for so many years. Because Abbas knows that if there is an election, Hamas will also win an election there. Because there isn't just support for Hamas in Gaza, there's also support for Hamas in the West Bank. It makes no sense. You can't just say they have to disengage. They're never going to disengage because they have undying level of support. So this totally makes no sense at all. What even are you recognizing? You're recognizing Gaza Strip and the West Bank. How does that solve the problem of East Jerusalem? There are so many problems here that needs to be fixed. Recognizing a so-called state, which is even nothing at all, totally, like, it just jumps the gun. You haven't done any work. It's literally trying to run before you crawl. It makes no sense. There's so many problems that need to be attended to before you even recognize anything. There is nothing to recognize right now. Nothing at all.
Well, I can tell you, response to this is completely mixed. Alex Dean, what's your reaction?
What an absurd statement from our Prime Minister, who says, with a straight face, my message to Hamas is unchanged. Well, they haven't given up the hostages, and you said, nevertheless, that you're going to give them a state. He claims that this is a contribution to the peace process. Well, it's not a contribution to the peace process. Well, first of all, because there isn't a state that you can recognise. But secondly, if there was one, it would be run by Hamas, which is a proscribed terrorist organisation. So the suggestion that it's on a par with its democratic neighbours or with members of the United Nations is a total absurdity. Any functioning organisation running the new state that he would seek to recognise is one that our government formally prescribes as a terrorist organisation. Some contribution to the peace process that would be.
Zoe?
Well, for me, it's that this statement barely makes sense. I mean, Keir Starmer says he wants a two-state solution, as do a number of MPs across the House in Parliament. Yet the conditions of recognising a Palestinian state rely on Israel's actions. This, you know, the whole point of having your statehood recognised is so you have an inalienable right to self-determination. But if that is based on the actions of another state, it's contradictory.
That's fair.
It doesn't make any sense. I don't think that's going to please anybody on either side.
You either have it or you don't.
You do, correct. Yeah. And if Israel, you know, if that is contingent on the actions of Israel, then there is no self-determination there. So it doesn't make sense.
That is a good point. You can't say on one hand they have inalienable rights to determine, to self-govern themselves, until, at the very least, Israel has to decide that. I say, okay, is it actually they actually have the rights to determine for themselves, or is it on Israel to actually give them the rights to determine for themselves? What, like, this is so stupid. It's so, like, it's so, it just makes no sense. There is so much work that needs to be done before recognizing the state. This is probably the last thing, or the second to the last, like a peace peace agreement where we've disengaged from each other, we're not at war with each other, we're totally at peace with each other, will be the last thing. Second to the last thing is probably this, recognizing the state. There is so much to work out. What part of the land of the whole mandate Palestine actually needs to go to the Palestinian people, and which part is going to go to Israel if you want a two-state solution? There is so much to there is so much to talk about. Recognizing doesn't do anything. It doesn't solve any problem. It does nothing at all. You just jump in hopes. There's so many problems. You're trying to run before you can crawl. This is what this is. Recognizing the state doesn't do anything at all. It doesn't tell us anything.
And I think there are many, many reasons why a Palestinian state needs to be recognised, not least because it will give Palestine access to those international bodies. It would be a step forward to diplomacy. It would be a step forward to them being able to access the ICC, UN.
It's not a forward step to diplomacy. This is so stupid. It makes no sense. Hamas is in control. Hamas have undying support in that area. This is not a forward step to diplomacy. You don't have diplomatic talks with terrorists. It makes no sense at all. There's been so many times when peace process has been started, but it hasn't gone anywhere because fights break out, some uprisings break out, intifada happens, okay? Rockets from Gaza into Israel every single time. Peace process rejected by both sides, a lot of the times by the Palestinian people, the PLO. There's been so many times when there's been peace process, but it hasn't gone anywhere. This idea that if you just recognize the state and then therefore they're going to just come to the table and accept something that has been rejected over 10 times already, it makes no sense, especially by a terrorist group that runs that whole place. It makes no sense at all. Just because they get recognized doesn't mean there's going to be any form of peace process. None at all. No way. That was part of the Oslo Accords. They did recognize Palestine as PLO as the authority to Palestine. Palestinian people, they did also recognize Israel, but it got nowhere.
Agencies, and hopefully it would empower moderate Palestinian voices to help actually create a statehood that would work alongside Israel. But what we have now is something that it is contradictory. It doesn't help anyone. It certainly doesn't help the plight of the Palestinian people. And I don't know if it will put pressure on Israel, but I don't think so. There is a basic framework. It's amazing to me that Keir Starmer was a leading lawyer, given that he is now giving way to his pressure from his own party that means he's doing this. I think when plenty of his MPs think they'll lose their seats if it goes just a bit more than John Ashworth did, and I'll lose my seat because enough people get upset about the Middle East, because he's completely disregarding the law on this. There's a framework for recognising states in international law, the Montevideo criteria, and they are, firstly, you have a permanent population. Well, that's not clear at all. Is the West Bank in or out? So, that's completely unclear. Secondly, you have permanent borders, recognisable borders.
Thank you. There is so much work that needs to actually delineate which part is part of Palestine, which part of Israel. That question hasn't been answered yet. You're just jumping over that. It's like, what do you recognize? There's nothing to recognize at all. You don't even know which part of West Bank belongs to the Israeli people or to the Palestinian people. There's nothing to recognize.
That's absolutely unclear. The Palestinian state would claim Jerusalem for a start. So you can't give them that one. The third is that you have a government. Absolutely not. The only organisation that's a semblance of running things in that state that would be recognised as Hamas, unless you're going to say Israel's the government of the new Palestine. And the fourth is the ability to enter into diplomatic relations with other countries. Well, that may come after, but they certainly can't do it now. So on the four criteria for recognising a state, the state that Keir Starmer wants to recognise currently meets none of them.
One of the things that I find interesting is the timing of this and why Keir Starmer has done what many people will call a bit of an about-face on this one. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, you all know the pressure that the Labour Party will be feeling, perhaps, not just from Reform UK, but now also from this new party, your party, or the left side, or whatever it's going to be called, I don't know. Anyway, Jeremy Corbyn, he's put a tweet out and said, Palestinian statehood is not a bargaining chip. It is not a threat. It is an inalienable right of the Palestinian people. Our demands on this shameful government remain the same. End all arms sales to Israel, impose widespread sanctions, and stop the genocide now.
But that's why it's stupid to do what he's done, because you can't out-Corbyn. He's never going to outbid Corbyn on doing more on this stuff. He's got to show that he's the moderate centrist. Who prefers the ersatz to the real? He can't outbid a party that's already outside mainstream politics on this.
But, I mean, Palestinian statehood isn't just something that's wanted by those on the left. There are, the scenes that have been coming out of Gaza have been absolutely horrendous for a long, long time. But over the past few weeks, it really feels like pressure has ramped up on Israel. And across the House, across the political spectrum, you are seeing people say this is intolerable. We need a diplomatic solution. We need a ceasefire, and we need Netanyahu to stop his bombardment, his collective punishment of people in Gaza. And I think recognising a Palestinian state is a step towards that. It is saying to Israel, Palestine deserves a right to self-determination. The people deserve to have a government in there. Now, of course, Hamas is the sticking point here. But by giving Palestine access to these UN agencies, access to things like the ICC, you get a step closer to giving them a government that will recognise them as people in a democracy.
No, that's just wrong. No, it doesn't make no sense. You can on one hand say Hamas isn't people that can actually sit on a diplomatic table to actually have talks with anyone, because they've been designated as a terrorist group, right? They can't actually govern that country. No one wants Hamas. Even people that support Palestinian people, you don't want Hamas to actually govern that country. You want actually reasonable, non-terrorist organization to actually govern it. So you can't one hand say that, and then on the other hand you say, oh no, we need to actually recognize these people. If you recognize them, then the only government, the only people that can actually govern the whole country is actually Hamas. They're actually the only ones. And then number two, she talks about the sovereignty shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip. No, actually, it should be used as a bargaining chip. If you want to be recognized, if you want any sort of diplomatic talks, you have to stop showing support for Hamas. That's it. You have to. Because the people that represent you, they have no obligation to uphold. They have no obligation to uphold whatever diplomatic conclusions that any delegation come to. Okay? They can talk right now and agree on anything, but in a year or two, they can literally just violate it. Because they're a terrorist group. They have no obligation to uphold anything that anyone says. So yes, actually, that their own sovereignty should be used as a bargaining chip. If you want your sovereignty, you cannot be showing support for a designated terrorist organization. You can't. It is what it is.
Who do you think turns up on day one at one of those international forums? It's a Hamas spokesman, right? And let's just, you were very generous, I think, in saying it's a sticking point. The Hamas attack on the 7th of October 2023 was the biggest loss of Jewish life in the world since the Holocaust, right? They raped their victims, they murdered pregnant women, they murdered people in their 90s, they kidnapped people and held them hostage. Of course, Keir Starmer says he demands the return of the hostages, but you haven't done it, but I'll still give you a state, or recognise a state.
Give them a state, but they don't even give back the hostages.
Those are the people, their leadership rejoiced in the suffering on the 7th of October and said they would kill Jews again and again until they'd wiped out the Zionist entity. That's who Keir Starmer wants to give statehood. That's who Keir Starmer wants to reward with statehood. Yep. Hamas puts command posts under hospitals. They weaponise food in their own population. Yep. They deliberately put children and civilians in the way of harm and then rejoice in that harm and video it for consumption internationally thereafter.
Also, they also conduct warfare in civilian outfits. Why? So it can be harder for Israel to actually be able to know whether or not this is a civilian or this is actually Hamas fighters. Obviously increases the possibility of civilians actually being part of the casualty. But people don't say that at all.
It's a capitalize
Those are the people that they want to actually recognize the state for and actually govern Palestinian people. How can it possibly be? They use infrastructure, schools, hospitals to be able to conduct warfare. How can you possibly... Okay,
that's who Keir Starmer wants to reward with statehood. And it would be worse if it would actually mean anything. But the ultimate punchline is recognition isn't going to mean a thing.
But everything you've just said there is true. We've all seen the horrors of October the 7th. It is one of the most barbaric things imaginable. And of course, as you suggest, still hostages to this day remain. But you know, despite all of that, the fact of the matter is, as Zoe has just suggested, we are now in some form of information war. And the images that are coming out of this situation, they are not looking good for Israel. They are not. And one of the challenges is trying to unpick what is Hamas propaganda and what is actual reality. And the fact that Israel kind of had all of that horrendous stuff happen to them and now be in the position where they are now looking like the bad guys is astonishing. And actually, if Israel had allowed international independent journalists into Gaza to see it for themselves, to try and combat and push back some of this, what people are calling Hamas propaganda, they would be in a different situation today. Why wouldn't they do that?
I'm sure some of it has been Hamas propaganda and images being faked, and we're being asked to rely on the so-called Hamas Health Ministry, which is an arm of a prescribed terrorist organisation for fact. fact. But I concede your point on two fronts. I concede your point about awful suffering in Gaza, who can deny that? And I concede your point about Israel denying access for international journalists. I thought that was a very bad decision. But ultimately, we're being asked to accept that our government is going to virtue signal by saying you are a state when palpably that's not true. Right now, the organisation that would administer this state is prescribed by our own country. And our Prime Minister makes no effort to square this circle, to seek to explain why he wishes to hand statehood to an organisation of terrorists. And the reason he gets away with it is, one, he's not challenged on it enough, but two, because nothing will actually change. There won't be a state of Palestine anytime soon, despite the United Kingdom saying that there is. You've got to recognise reality rather than your own virtue signalling, and he doesn't want to.
Absolutely. He doesn't actually, he knows there's actually not going to be a recognition. He knows that. He just wants to have an excuse. So, hey, the people that are pressuring me in my own cabinet, look, I did give an ultimatum for recognition for Palestinian people. And if it doesn't happen, well, that's not my fault. I did give an ultimatum. So it is what it is. He knows nothing is actually going to happen. It's just feeding into the pressure. That's it.
I can tell you, it's really, you're mixed on this one at home because, as you say, Zoe, and I'm among them, I've said repeatedly, I cannot bear to see the images of these children. I can't bear it, as any rational human being would feel when you do see these images. It affects you in lots of ways. The counterpoint to that would be, there was that recent image that was on the front page of one of the newspapers here.
Cropped.
Yeah, many people have now got in touch and said, well, hold on a minute, Michelle, because I was one of the ones that have raised this and been upset about that. People are saying, well, hold on, that was a child with a medical condition. The mother, she wasn't starving, and the other family members that were in the picture that have been cut out, they also were not starving. So there's a lot of pushback on some of this stuff, saying it needs more investigative journalism going into it. But again, that's very hard when Israel won't actually let anyone in to actually independently do that. But wherever you stand on this, wherever you're wanting to draw the line and to pick bits off pictures and all the rest of it, there will undeniably be children suffering, and there have been now for a long time on the flip.
For sure, there is no doubt that the suffering is happening, okay? Absolutely. And you should try to absolutely just end it as soon as possible so more innocent people don't die. But the problem is, if you just end this right now and you just call it off, and then everything was to end off without even giving the hostages back, all that happens, you just kick the can somewhere else. That's all you're doing. You're just kicking it somewhere else. October 7th is just going to happen in a year or two again. That's what's good. This has been the history of this conflict. There's been conflict, war, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 years of peace, and then another war break out again. Clearly, just leaving it and just be like, all right, we've done enough, let's just pull out of it, clearly is not the end solution here, okay? There's been so many times. They've had war of independence, war of the Arab Leagues, 67 wars, like 73 wars. Like, there's been so many conflicts and there is no end to it. Just thinking we're just going to get peace just by pulling out and leaving everything to them is never going to be the base. History literally proves that. There has to be something else done. Hamas has to, they have to go. They just have to go at all costs. That's the first process. But as long as support is still high for Hamas from the people of Palestine, unfortunately, it's literally against their own cause. But they don't say it. But obviously, there are also criticism for Israel, allowing journalists into the Gaza Strip to obviously investigate to see whether or not these pictures and everything that's actually happening, whether it's actually true or not, to actually get some justification behind some of these images and some of the information that's coming out. Because right now, no one actually knows what to believe or what you don't believe. But that's just my thoughts. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and also drop a like on the video.